In his book, Good to Great, author Jim Collins tells about an unforgettable interview he once conducted, an interview with Admiral Jim Stockdale. I found the story to be insightful and fascinating, and I'd like to read a portion of that to you. So let me grab my reading glasses, and here we go. All right. Admiral Jim Stockdale was the highest-ranking United States military officer in the Hanoi Hilton, a prisoner of war camp during the height of the Vietnam War. He tortured over 20 times during his 8-year imprisonment from 1965 to 1973. Stockdale lived out the war without any prisoner's rights, no set release date, and no certainty as to whether he would even survive to see his family again. Jim writes, "You can understand then my anticipation at the prospect of spending an afternoon with Stockdale. In preparation for this interview, I read In Love and War, the book that Stockdale and his wife had written in alternating chapters, chronicling their experiences during those 8 years when they were apart. As I moved through the book, I found myself getting depressed. It just seemed so bleak. The uncertainty of his fate, the brutality of his captors, and so forth. And then it dawned on me. Here I am, sitting in my warm and comfortable office, looking out over the beautiful Stanford campus on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and I'm getting depressed reading this. And I know the end of the story. I know that he gets out, reunites with his family, becomes a national hero, and gets to spend the later years of his life studying philosophy on this same beautiful campus. If it feels depressing to me, how on earth did he deal with it when he was actually there and did not know the end of the story?" So I asked him. "I never lost faith in the end of the story," he said when I asked him. "I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life, which, in retrospect, I would not trade." I didn't say anything for many minutes, and as we continued the slow walk toward the faculty club, Stockdale limping and his arc swinging his leg that was stiff and had never fully recovered from repeated torture. Finally, about 100 meters of silence later, I asked, "Who didn't make it out?" "Oh, that's easy," he said. "The optimists." "The optimists? I don't understand," I said, now completely confused given what he'd said 100 meters earlier. "The optimists, they were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas." And Christmas would come, and Christmas would go. And then they'd say, we're going to be out by Easter. And Easter would come, and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. After a long pause and more walking, he turned to me and said, "This is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be." To this day, I carry a mental image of Stockdale admonishing the optimists, "We're not getting out by Christmas. Deal with it. Deal with it." This is part one in a new series, a series about hope and about a loss of optimism. In part 5 of this series, I'll share more of what led me to dig deeply into this topic, but it had to do with the death of optimism. I saw it in someone I respected. I witnessed firsthand the pain and the despair that they felt when they realized that things were never going to get better. They were confused by God's seeming unwillingness to answer their prayers for help. They were deeply discouraged because their hopes for relief and improving conditions were dashed to pieces, and like Humpty Dumpty who fell on the wall and fell off, right, never to be put back together again. Their optimism died. And with it, their hope died. Because their hope was that maybe the next strategy or the next medicine or the next expert opinion would give them what they really hoped for, which was relief. A reason to believe that things would get better, and therefore a reason to keep pressing on. I experienced a lesser but significant dose of this myself. Like Jim Stockdale said, you can never afford to lose faith that you will prevail in the end. That's code for your hope. You can never afford to lose that. At the same time, you have to deal with the brutal facts of your current reality. He said, this is a very important lesson. It's a lesson I'm learning personally. I've been digging deep into God's Word, and I'm learning about hope, solid hope that doesn't let you down in the end. Hope so solid that it's actually confident expectation. I'm practicing some things as well, things that I hope will someday become habits, but they're already making a difference. And I believe that God wants me to share this learning that I'm doing with you. As we go through this series, which is going to be 6 parts in all, there are really 2 giant ideas that I want to pass on. The first one is this: that biblical hope centers on God's character, accomplishments, and promises rather than optimism about circumstances. Let me say that again. Biblical hope. When you read about hope in the Bible, it always centers on God's character, God's accomplishments, and God's promises rather than optimism about circumstances. That we're going to get it together and it's going to come together and it's going to get better, at least on this side of heaven. Number 2 is this: that the Bible portrays hope as both a gift and a choice. It's something that's given to us and it's something that we have to choose for ourselves. And so over the next 6 weeks, I plan to take this apart, those 2 statements, and we're going to look at each one of them, and I'll talk about how to leverage them and which ones we're doing each day, each time we're together. But in parts 1 and 2 of this series, we're going to look at the very beginning. Biblical hope centers on God's character. And we're going to start in perhaps an unexpected place. We're going to start with God's name. Now, we're going to look at a passage together in a few minutes, an amazing passage. But let me kind of set that up for you, tell you the backstory. The passage involves Moses, who was the man that God used to lead Israel out of slavery in Egypt. And at the point of this conversation that we're going to look at together today, Moses was having a follow-up conversation with God. Let's see, previously, Moses, while he was up on the mountain with God having his first conversation, Israel, the nation that he had been used of God to help deliver from slavery, Israel decided that a golden statue in the shape of a calf was the God who had redeemed them and rescued them. And they worshiped this God with pagan practices, and God was upset. Moses interceded for the people with God, and fallout happened, but the fallout was limited. And now Moses is back on the mountain in conversation with God to find out a very important thing. He wants to know, God, are you still going to go with us to the promised land? Or are you done with us? Very important. So Moses asked, and God said, yes, I will go with you because you, Moses, have found favor with me, and I know you by name. I know you. And by that, God isn't saying, Moses, I know your name. God's like, I know you, which led Moses to respond. This is chapter 33 of Exodus, verse 18. Moses said, please let me see your glory. This is Moses' way of saying, God, you are amazing and awesome, but you say you know me. I want to know you. So show me your glory. Let me see all that is you. Let me know you like you know me. Well, God responds. This is verse 19. He said, I'll cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I'll proclaim the name, the Lord, before you. But he added, you cannot see my face, for humans cannot see me and live. The Lord said, here's a place near me. You are to stand on the rock, and when my glory passes by, I'll put you in the crevice of the rock and cover you with my hand until I pass by. Then I will take my hand away, and you'll see my back, but my face will not be seen. A couple things kind of jump out to me about that passage. First, when God said, I'll cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, that word goodness, that's a big word. What it really means is God saying, listen, I'm going to pass in front of you, and I'm going to let my entire character, my true nature be revealed to you. That's huge, right? God's like, I'm going to show you what I'm really like. Second, God said, when I do this, I'm not going to just let my glory go by, my goodness go by, so you can know what I'm really like. I'm going to proclaim my name. I'm going to say my name. Now, Moses already knew God's name. Even Moses, back when he was first commissioned to go to Egypt, back in Exodus 3, Moses asked God, well, what's your name? What shall I tell them? Like, who sent me? What God will I tell them sent me? And God said, my name is I am who I am. In other words, when God said that, he was saying, I am, right? not I was or I will be, I am. So he's speaking about his eternality, but he says, I am who I am. In other words, what I am, I always am. God was speaking about his consistency, about his reliability, his character. Whatever character traits I have that all the time. My nature is consistent. It doesn't change. It's not like somebody you know or you thought you knew, and then later on found out you didn't know them all that well. You didn't know the true person. God's like, I am who I am. Now, one other fact that's really important before we continue the story is this. In these days, when Moses was having this conversation with God in that time, that epic, your name was often shorthand for your character or your destiny. Like your name meant something. We don't pay as much attention to that now. But in those days, like when you told somebody your name, you were telling them something about either what you were like or what was prophesied, what your destiny would be. My name is Andrew, by the way, and I looked it up. Andrew means manly or brave, right? And so back in the day, if I had said that, people, oh, okay. And then would wonder, okay, is it true? Do you live up to your name? And as you can tell from my voice, I have a cold, but it sounds like I'm very manly, doesn't it? So there you go. All right, so back to Exodus 34. When Moses asked to see God, and God said that he would let him see the backside and hear his name, God gave Moses some homework, and then the next day Moses is back on the mountain with God. Let's jump back into the story. This is Exodus 34, verse 5. The Lord came down in a cloud, stood with him there, and proclaimed his name, the Lord. The Lord passed in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord. The Lord is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in faithful love and truth, maintaining faithful love to 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity, rebellion, and sin. But he will not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing the consequences of the father's iniquity on the children and the grandchildren to the third and fourth generation. Now, you didn't see it there, because you're reading in English just like me, but there was a name switch. It said God came down and he proclaimed the name, right, the Lord. But that's not what he actually said. If you go back to Hebrew in the language that this was recorded, it says God proclaimed his name Yahweh. And Yahweh is not the equivalent, the Hebrew equivalent of I am. It has a different meaning. So God said Yahweh. Yahweh is a compassionate God, right? So we could read it like this. The Lord passed in front of him and proclaimed Yahweh. Yahweh is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in faithful love and truth, maintaining faithful love, right? And so on. Yahweh. Let me read you something. This is from the book God Has a Name. The author does a really good job of explaining what just happened here. Yahweh, actually in the Hebrew Bible, is YHWH. It's Yahweh without any vowels. He says YHWH is from the exact same root word as I am who I am. But IA, which is what God said, I am, is the first person. Yahweh is in the third person. As I say it, you can kind of hear the similarity. So IA, which is what God said when he first talked to Moses, means I am. Yahweh, which is what he just said his name was when he was telling Moses, means he is. He is. It's third person, right? He is. Which is why when God says his name, it's I am. But when we say God's name, it's Yahweh, right? He is. Does that all make sense? So that might lead you to a question. Why does it say the Lord then in our English Bible instead of he is? What if they were just translating from Hebrew to English? Why doesn't it say, and the Lord said, he is a companion? Why does it say the Lord? Well, let me read you a little bit about that, because that will explain that as well. This next part, is the author says, is a little bit technical. Okay, actually it's very technical, but strap in tight, because there's a huge payoff if you can survive these next couple pages, and I know all of you can. In ancient Hebrew, there are no vowels in the written language. That sounds crazy, right? Imagine a world with no computers, or even paper or pens, a world where you had to carve every letter into clay or stone. Writing was all about economy, and writing with no vowels actually works pretty well. So imagine this. I'm putting on the screen there for you. Can you read that? Yeah, you can see that, right? This is a sentence. Well done. Okay, that's what reading ancient Hebrew was like. Well, it's the same thing with God's name, YHWH. Now, it's hard for us to translate this directly into English, even though I just said we could say it as He is, and here's why. A few reasons. Number one, we don't know for sure what the actual vowels were, okay, because they were never written down. Now, almost all Hebrew scholars think Yahweh is right, but honestly, it's still a guess. But the main reason is that over time, the Hebrews stopped saying the name of God out loud. One of the 10 commandments is, you shall not misuse the name of Yahweh, your God. So over the years, they grew so scared of accidentally breaking this command that they just stopped saying His name altogether. Instead, they would call Him other names. One popular name was Hashem, which literally means the name. So instead of calling Him by name, they called Him the name. But the most common title was Adonai, a Hebrew word meaning Lord. In the ancient Near East, it's what a servant would call his master, so they used that title for God. Now, this is where we get the word Jehovah, or the other name for God. Jehovah is the vowels from Adonai put into the consonants from YHWH, like this, as you can see on the screen there. So because of the Jewish switch to Adonai, usually YHWH is translated into English as the Lord. This is how the vast majority of translations write out God's name. And so it's what most followers of Jesus call God, right? And to help you know that it was originally Yahweh, when you look at it in your English Bible, you see it with all caps. That's your cue that that's what was going on there. All right, that was a very interesting aside. Let's go back to the big point. When God says His name is Yahweh, meaning He is. You can read Exodus 34, verses 6 to 7, like this. And the Lord passed in front of him and proclaimed Yahweh, or He is, right? He is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in faithful. In other words, right? He's all these things, and this is who He is at His core. This is His character, and it doesn't change. This is His true nature. You have seen Him for the way He really is, right? He is the compassionate and gracious God. He is slow to anger. He is abounding in love and faithfulness. He is maintaining faithful love or mercy to 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity, rebellion, and sin. He is not leaving the guilty unpunished. He brings the consequences of the Father's iniquity on the children and grandchildren of the third and fourth generations. And when Moses has this encounter with God and he gets to see what God is like, he sees all of God's goodness and he hears God proclaim His name. He is, right? God is. This is who I am. Moses' response, you can read it here in verses 8 and 9. Moses' response is like, oh my goodness. Falls to his knees and then says, God, go with us. And God, forgive us. Because that's what you do. That's what you are, the forgiving God. He is. And God, own us. Take us as your possession. We could have no better fate than to belong to you. Because that's who you are. Not just something you sometimes do. This is who you are. Really cool. God's name. He is. All right, let's flip the page and talk about then, how does God's character give us hope? So as you go through the Bible and you look at times when people were in desperate need, they needed God to come through for them, you find that God gives us hope. Well, actually two reasons for hope. Reason number one, as we go through these really difficult times, we know that God might choose to miraculously intervene. Right? He can snap His fingers or show up or however He wishes to do it, but He could perform a miracle. And because He could do that, and because He's a good Father who loves to give good gifts to His children, God followers have the right to ask Him to miraculously intervene. We don't have the right to demand it, but we have the right to ask. That's why when we did the whole prayer series, we quoted Paul Miller, and it said, ask boldly, but surrender completely, right? So we have hope because we know God could and He might choose to intervene miraculously. Reason number two that we have hope according to the Bible is what we've been talking about today. We have hope because God is compassionate and gracious, and very slow to anger, and abounding in love, and he's faithful, and he's merciful, and he's just. And if I contrast that with the other reason for hope, this one, God followers have the right to expect this, because all we're really doing is we're expecting God to be true to himself. It has nothing to do with us. This is why over the last 9 months, when life has been kind of tough for me, actually quite tough for me, I have prayed the simple prayer, God, have mercy on me, literally hundreds of times. God, sometimes Jesus, Son of David, but God, have mercy on me. And when I do that, I'm not asking God to do something different or something other than what he would normally do. I'm just simply asking God to be what he is, right? To live up to his name, to let me experience the truth of his name in my life. So when I would come to God and I'd cry out over and over, God, have mercy on me, I didn't come on the basis of my need. Like somehow I finally become so desperate, so needy that I finally deserve, I'm going to merit God like help. I don't come on the basis of my need, like, okay, I've got enough need. And I don't come on the basis of my worthiness, like I've done enough things that somehow that I've got cred with God now, and I can expect him to come through for me. No, I come to him simply on the basis of his character. Like, God, you are, right? Your name is, he is. And God, I need you to be compassionate to me. I need you to be gracious to me. God, I need you to be slow to anger with me. God, I need you to abound in love and be faithful to me and merciful. God, I come on the basis of his character. I have hope because I'm not trying to talk God into doing something. I'm just trying to tell God how much I need him to be what he already is. Told you I'll tell you more about what led me to dive into this topic in a later part in this series, but I was thinking maybe it's only me that has recently had my hope challenged. Maybe it's only me that needs a new way to think, a new way to live when situations are dark, difficult. Or maybe not. Maybe you're listening and you're like, yeah, this hasn't been a pretty season for me either, Pastor Andy, and I've got to admit I've had my questions and my doubts and my hopes. One of the things that I've learned over the last few months is that Jesus followers often have mixed hope. We've got some biblical hope and some of something else. Usually it's optimism about our future here on earth, right? That things are going to get better and it's going to get a little easier, or at least a little less painful, a little more bearable, that kind of thing. We usually have a mix of these two things, biblical hope and this, what I'm calling optimism. Hear me on this. Optimism eventually fails. Eventually optimism fails. You hit some scenario from which it's not going to get better here on earth. It's not going to work out. There is no more option or appeal process or medicine or person or, right? Optimism eventually fails. Biblical hope never does. Maybe you're like most American Jesus followers and your hope is a mix of biblical hope and hope based on something else. Maybe then what we could do is we could do at least a hope checkup, maybe a hope reset, and we could do it together. But let's start with a checkup. And by the way, before I tell you how to do the checkup, let me just say this. Maybe we should start this today rather than put it off, because here's another thing that I've learned through this process is that most people don't discover that their hope was misplaced until they find themselves in a season of life in which they needed their hope the most. Yeah, do you need me to finish this sentence? Right, it all came crashing down. So let's talk hope checkup. Today I want to suggest that we do a self-diagnostic on our hope. It has two questions. Question one, what makes me feel hopeful? Like, in order for me to feel like there's hope in this, what situation or what condition? Like, do I have to be able to see how it might work out in the end, and I can see how this is going to come together? Or do I have to see a little bit of improvement or some sign or something? What makes me feel hopeful? What has to happen? What conditions? What situation? What's got to be at play in order for me to feel like, okay, there's hope here? Flip that around and you get question 2. What makes me feel hopeless? Under what conditions? What situations? What if this happens? I just feel like it's hopeless. I encourage you to take some time this week, over the next few days, and do a hope checkup. This self-diagnostic. What makes me feel hopeful? What makes me feel hopeless? We will pick up right here in part 2.